The Minnesota wind cut through my coat like a knife that bitter January night. I'd just finished dinner at Emily and Kyle's house, trying to offer some gentle advice about their marriage troubles that had become impossible to ignore. Kyle had been drinking steadily since we sat down for dinner, his voice getting louder and more aggressive with each beer he consumed. When I carefully suggested they might benefit from some professional counseling to work through their issues, his face twisted with sudden rage. Before I could even process what was happening, he lunged forward and shoved me hard with both hands planted firmly against my chest. I stumbled backward off their front porch and crashed heavily into the snow-covered driveway below. The thick ice beneath the snow knocked all the breath from my lungs, and sharp pain immediately shot through my left hip like lightning. As I lay there gasping for air in the freezing cold, I looked up desperately at my daughter, Emily, standing frozen in their doorway. She just stared down at me with wide, terrified eyes, saying absolutely nothing at all. I struggled painfully to my feet, snow soaking through my clothes and numbing my skin, fully expecting Emily to rush over and help me up like any caring daughter would. Instead, she turned away from the doorway and started nervously clearing dinner plates from the table, acting like absolutely nothing had happened between her husband and her father. My own daughter, the precious little girl I'd raised completely alone after her mother died of cancer, was now pretending she hadn't just witnessed her husband violently assault her elderly father. Kyle smirked coldly from the doorway, his alcohol-heavy breath visible in the frigid air as he watched me brush snow from my coat. "Stay in your place, old man," he muttered loudly enough for both Emily and me to hear clearly. Emily's hands trembled visibly as she stacked the dishes with unnecessary force, but she still remained completely silent about what had just occurred. I brushed the wet snow from my coat with shaking hands, suddenly realizing that something dark and terrible had been growing inside this house for longer than I'd understood. The betrayal from my own daughter burned much worse than my bruised ribs ever could. Inside their warm kitchen afterward, I waited patiently for Emily to finally acknowledge what had just happened right in front of her eyes. She kept her back, turned to me, scrubbing dishes that were already perfectly clean with obsessive intensity. When I gently asked if she was okay and if we needed to talk about Kyle's behavior, her voice came out small and frightened. "Dad, maybe you should just go home now. It's getting pretty late outside." I studied her face carefully when she finally turned around, noticing troubling details I'd somehow missed during previous visits. She was noticeably thinner than she'd been just last month, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and she visibly flinched whenever Kyle's heavy footsteps creaked on the floorboards overhead. The fear written across her expression wasn't really about me getting hurt by her husband's violence. She was genuinely terrified of her own husband and what he might do next. That shocking realization hit me like receiving a second violent shove into the freezing snow. I left their house that night with my knees throbbing painfully and my heart completely broken, wondering desperately if I had somehow lost my beloved daughter forever to this monster. The next morning when I woke up, I could barely manage to walk without intense pain. My left hip was badly swollen and colored deep black with ugly bruises from hitting the frozen ground so hard. Every single step I took reminded me vividly of Kyle's violent shove and Emily's devastating silence afterward. At the local pharmacy, while picking up pain medication, the young clerk behind the counter noticed me limping badly and asked with genuine concern what had happened to me. I lied smoothly without even thinking, automatically saying I'd simply slipped on my own icy driveway the night before. The false words came so easily from my mouth that I realized with horror how simple it was to hide evidence of abuse from others. If I was already instinctively making excuses for Kyle's violent behavior after just one incident, what kinds of lies was Emily telling herself every single day? That night before bed, I made a solemn promise while standing in front of my deceased wife's photograph on the fireplace mantel. I would systematically uncover the complete truth about what was really happening inside that house, no matter how much it might hurt me to discover the full extent of it. I started visiting Emily and Kyle much more frequently, always arriving unannounced so they couldn't prepare or hide anything from me, watching everything that happened with completely new eyes. Emily had obviously lost a significant amount of weight since Christmas, her cheeks now hollow and unnaturally pale like someone recovering from a serious illness. She jumped noticeably whenever Kyle raised his voice, even about completely mundane things like dinner plans or television channels. I noticed how she seemed to avoid making direct eye contact with him, and how she appeared to literally hold her breath whenever he entered whatever room she was in. During one particularly tense visit, I witnessed Kyle grab her wrist far too hard while they argued about their monthly budget, leaving angry red finger marks on her delicate skin. Emily quickly pulled her sleeve down when she caught me looking at the marks he'd left. My blood boiled with rage, but I forced myself to remain completely calm and controlled. If I exploded with anger right now, I might lose any chance I had to help her escape this situation. I absolutely had to be smart and strategic about this rescue mission. 2 weeks later, while shopping for groceries downtown, Mrs. Henderson from Emily and Kyle's neighborhood deliberately approached me near the frozen food section. She looked around nervously to make sure no one else could overhear us before leaning close to whisper urgently, "Walter, is Emily doing okay these days? I've been hearing some very disturbing things through our shared wall, especially late at night. There's been yelling, sometimes crying, and it sounds like furniture being thrown around." Her whispered words confirmed absolutely every one of my worst fears about the situation. Other people in their neighborhood were noticing the signs of abuse too, which meant the violence and control were definitely getting worse over time. That same evening, I called Emily just to check in and see how she was doing. We talked casually for a few minutes about completely unimportant things like the weather and grocery shopping. But just when I was about to hang up the phone, I heard her begin to cry softly. She thought I had already ended our call, and the heartbreaking sound of her muffled sobs through the phone line broke my heart into a million pieces. My precious little girl was trapped and suffering in complete silence, just like her mother had during her cancer battle. I vividly remembered teaching my students about real courage during my 40 years as a dedicated schoolteacher. How staying completely silent when witnessing cruelty against others actually makes you part of that cruelty yourself. Now my own precious daughter was completely paralyzed by exactly the same kind of fear I'd spent decades teaching children to overcome with bravery. Maybe I had somehow failed her during her childhood, not properly preparing her for this kind of dangerous situation she now found herself trapped in. But whether I had failed her or not, I absolutely could not let this nightmare continue for even one more day. I immediately started keeping a detailed written journal, carefully documenting every single incident I witnessed, every unexplained bruise I noticed on her body, and every time Emily flinched or made elaborate excuses for Kyle's increasingly aggressive behavior. If this horror was ever going to end properly, I would need solid evidence that would hold up strongly in a court of law. The experienced teacher in me knew that thorough documentation would be absolutely crucial for any legal proceedings. I deliberately invited both Emily and Kyle to dinner at my house the following Sunday evening, secretly determined to create a controlled situation where Kyle would inevitably reveal his true violent nature to others. It didn't take very much provocation at all. When I casually mentioned that their kitchen faucet had been dripping during my last visit and offered to fix it for them, Kyle's face immediately darkened with barely controlled rage. "We don't need your help with anything around our house, you interfering old man. Emily can handle her own household responsibilities without your constant meddling." His voice rose dramatically with each word he spoke while Emily visibly shrank back in her chair like a frightened child expecting to be hit. I had deliberately invited my neighbor Mrs. Patterson to join us for dinner, and she witnessed the entire ugly scene unfold right in front of her. Later that evening, as she helped me clear the dinner table and wash dishes, she whispered urgently, "Walter, I saw absolutely everything that happened tonight. That young man has some very serious psychological problems that need professional attention immediately." Finally, I had secured a reliable outside witness to Kyle's abusive behavior patterns who could testify if needed. The following week, Emily came to visit me alone for the first time in many months, which immediately raised my suspicions. When I offered to help her remove her heavy winter coat, she winced in obvious pain and pulled away from my touch. Before she could stop me or make an excuse, I gently but firmly pushed up her sleeve, revealing a clear pattern of dark bruises wrapped around her upper arm. They looked exactly like fingerprints, purple and blue marks pressed deep into her pale skin by someone's violent grip. My heart completely shattered seeing the evidence, but I kept my voice perfectly steady and calm so I wouldn't frighten her further. "Emily, sweetheart, You absolutely cannot hide this kind of abuse anymore. This has to stop immediately. She stared down at the floor, tears beginning to fall silently down her cheeks like rain. Dad, if you do anything at all about this situation, he promised he'll destroy both of us completely. You don't understand how truly dangerous Kyle can be when he gets angry. Her whispered confession filled me with both burning rage and absolute determination. My innocent daughter was living in constant terror every single day, and I was going to end this nightmare once and for all. Emily finally told me the complete truth that afternoon, and it was worse than I had ever imagined possible. Kyle controlled absolutely every aspect of her daily life, like a prison warden. He constantly monitored all her phone calls, tracked her movements throughout the day, and had systematically isolated her from every single friend she'd ever had. He regularly threatened to seriously hurt me if she ever told anyone about his ongoing abuse and violence. That's exactly why she had stayed completely silent that terrible night when he pushed me violently into the freezing snow. She was desperately trying to protect me the only way she knew how under the circumstances. All their bank accounts were exclusively in his name, so she had absolutely no access to money for food, gas, or emergency situations. She felt completely trapped with nowhere to turn and no one who could help her escape. As she spoke through her tears, I could see how cleverly and systematically Kyle had constructed this invisible prison around her over many months. But I also clearly saw that she was finally ready to fight back if she had someone strong enough to help her break free safely. The question was whether I, at my age, could be that person. My old friend Marcus was a retired attorney who had specialized in complex family law cases for over 30 years. I visited his downtown office and carefully laid out Emily's entire situation in precise detail, holding nothing back. He listened without any interruption, taking detailed notes on a yellow legal pad throughout my account. Walter, this is clearly a textbook pattern of severe domestic abuse, he said seriously when I finally finished speaking. But emotional manipulation and complete financial control are unfortunately much harder to prove legally than obvious physical violence. You absolutely need solid, undeniable evidence. Clear photographs of injuries, audio recordings of threats and violence, detailed witness statements from neighbors. The more thorough documentation you can gather, the stronger Emily's case will be in court. He emphasized repeatedly that I needed to be extremely careful in my approach, because directly confronting an abuser often causes them to escalate their violence dramatically. That same night, I bought a small digital recorder from an electronics store and carefully hid it in my winter coat pocket. At their next family dinner the following Sunday, I quietly activated the hidden recorder before entering their house through the front door. Kyle was already noticeably drunk and clearly spoiling for a fight about something. When I politely suggested he might want to slow down on drinking beer before dinner was even served, his voice immediately turned ugly and threatening. You think you can come into my house and tell me what to do? You pathetic old fool. You're nothing but a washed-up teacher who couldn't even keep his own wife alive long enough to see her grandchildren. Emily sat completely frozen in her chair while I forced myself to stay perfectly calm, deliberately letting Kyle reveal his true violent nature to my hidden recording device. Then, in a sudden burst of alcohol-fueled rage, he grabbed his heavy dinner plate and hurled it violently across the room. The plate shattered loudly against the wall just inches from Emily's head, sending sharp ceramic pieces flying everywhere around her. She screamed and covered her face with both hands, expecting to be hit next. The whole terrifying incident was captured perfectly on my hidden recorder, including Emily's frightened scream. The very next day, I played the shocking recording for Emily in the safety of my living room. When she heard Kyle's voice spewing pure hatred and violent threats, followed immediately by the loud crash of breaking dishes near her head, she began to cry uncontrollably. Hearing the incident removed from the terrifying moment made her finally realize how dangerous and abnormal things had truly become in her marriage. She was exactly like a frog sitting in slowly boiling water, gradually adjusting to each escalation of violence until serious abuse seemed completely normal. Dad, I honestly can't believe I've been living like this for so long. She sobbed desperately into my shoulder. How did I let it get this bad? For the first time in many months, I clearly saw doubt creeping into her eyes about all the elaborate excuses she'd been making for Kyle's increasingly violent behavior. We're going to get you out of that house safely, I promised her, holding her tight against me like when she was small. But you absolutely have to trust me completely and follow my instructions exactly. One mistake could be deadly for both of us. That same evening, Kyle deliberately cornered me outside their house as I was leaving after dinner. His breath reeked strongly of whiskey, and his bloodshot eyes held a genuinely dangerous glint that chilled my blood. You think you're real smart, don't you? You interfering old man, he sneered menacingly, stepping much closer to intimidate me. I know exactly what you've been doing. You've been filling Emily's head with poison lies about me and our marriage. Stay completely out of my personal business, or I swear I'll put you in the ground right next to your dead wife, where you belong. My hands trembled with pure anger, but I stared back at him without flinching or backing down. He clearly thought fear and intimidation would silence me permanently, just like it had successfully silenced Emily for so long. What Kyle didn't realize was that his direct threat against my life had just given me exactly the evidence I desperately needed. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been walking her small dog and heard every single word of his threat. Now I had a reliable witness to his direct threat against my life, which was a serious felony. I immediately contacted the domestic abuse shelter downtown and spoke at length with their experienced counselor, a woman named Rebecca Martinez. She patiently explained detailed safety protocols and helped me understand exactly how dangerous the situation would become when Emily finally decided to leave Kyle permanently. The most dangerous time for any abuse victim is always when they try to escape their abuser, she warned me seriously. We absolutely need to have everything planned perfectly in advance. Emily will need all her important documents, some cash money, a completely safe place to stay, and a legal restraining order filed immediately. We worked together for hours to create a comprehensive emergency escape plan. Emily would secretly pack a bag with absolute essentials and hide it somewhere Kyle would never think to look. I would keep secure copies of her identification papers and social security card at my house. When the critical moment finally came, we would have to move extremely fast and decisively. There would be no second chances if we made any mistakes. Rebecca emphasized that Kyle would almost certainly try to track Emily down and potentially hurt both of us when he discovered she was gone. We had to be prepared for violent retaliation. A massive snowstorm hit Minnesota the following weekend, the kind of blizzard that completely shuts down highways and keeps everyone trapped indoors for days. I knew from experience that Kyle's heavy drinking always got significantly worse during bad weather when he was stuck inside, so I made the dangerous decision to drive through the blizzard to check on Emily's safety. My old pickup truck skidded repeatedly on the icy roads, but I managed to make it to their house just as I heard loud shouting coming from inside. Through their living room window, I could clearly see Kyle waving his arms angrily while Emily cowered on the couch, tears streaming down her terrified face. I quickly pulled out my smartphone and hit the record button before knocking firmly on their front door. This time, I was absolutely going to capture everything on high-quality video, not just audio. I needed visual evidence of Kyle's violence that no court could possibly ignore or dismiss. When Kyle angrily yanked the front door open, his face was completely flushed with alcohol and uncontrolled rage. "What the hell do you want now? You interfering old fool," he screamed at me. Before I could even answer his question, he shoved me backward violently with both hands, much harder than that first time in the snow. I stumbled backward but managed to stay upright on my feet, my smartphone still recording every second of his assault. "Get off my property right now," he continued screaming. "Nobody wants you here, you pathetic old man." Behind him, Emily suddenly ran forward, screaming desperately for him to stop hurting me. The raw fear and panic in her voice was absolutely heartbreaking, but it was also crucial evidence. My phone's camera captured his unprovoked violence, his alcohol-fueled threats, and Emily's terrified reaction to his behavior. When she reached me safely, she grabbed my arm and whispered urgently, "Please take me away from here right now, Dad. Tonight, before he kills one of us." The desperation in her voice told me we were completely out of time. It was now or never. We moved through their house like thieves in the night, while Kyle passed out drunk on their living room couch, snoring loudly. Emily quickly grabbed her pre-packed emergency bag and all the important documents I'd helped her gather systematically over the past several weeks. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she packed her grandmother's antique jewelry and a few precious family photographs that couldn't be replaced. My heart pounded like a drum as we crept silently through the dark house, absolutely terrified that Kyle might suddenly wake up and physically stop us from leaving. The ongoing blizzard provided perfect cover as we loaded everything into my pickup truck as quietly as possible. For the first time in many months, I saw something that looked like genuine hope flickering in Emily's frightened eyes. But just as we pulled carefully out of their driveway, bright headlights suddenly appeared behind us in the swirling snow. Kyle had somehow woken up and was now following us in his large pickup truck. My worst nightmare was becoming reality. At first, I desperately hoped it was just another driver struggling with the dangerous road conditions. But when the headlights began swerving aggressively behind us, perfectly matching every turn I made, I knew with absolute certainty it was Kyle pursuing us. My old hands gripped the steering wheel as tightly as possible as I tried to navigate the treacherous, icy highway, while Emily hyperventilated in the passenger seat beside me. The fierce storm made visibility nearly impossible, but I could clearly hear Kyle's truck engine roaring as he tried desperately to catch up with us. "He's going to kill us both when he catches us," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. I pressed my truck's accelerator as hard as I dared, praying silently that my old vehicle would hold together long enough to reach safety. Behind us, Kyle's headlights grew steadily brighter as he gained ground on us. I realized with growing terror that his newer truck was much faster than mine, and the roads were getting more dangerous by the minute. We were running out of time and options quickly. Suddenly, Kyle's pursuing truck hit a large patch of deadly black ice while attempting to pass us on the left side. I watched in my rearview mirror as his vehicle spun completely out of control, sliding sideways across both lanes before plowing directly into a deep snow-filled ditch beside the highway. The heavy truck tilted at a steep angle, white steam rising ominously from the badly damaged engine. Emily and I immediately pulled over safely, both of us shaking uncontrollably as we watched Kyle slowly crawl out of the wreckage. He was obviously limping badly and bleeding from a deep cut on his forehead, but he was very much alive and appeared even angrier than before the crash. "Should we call an ambulance for help?" Emily asked, her voice genuinely torn between guilt and relief at seeing her abuser injured. I looked directly at my traumatized daughter and said quietly, "Sometimes the universe has its own way of delivering perfect justice, sweetheart." We sat there for several minutes watching Kyle struggle in the snow, but neither of us reached for our phones. Some people create their own consequences through their actions. By early morning, 2 police officers were knocking firmly on my front door. Kyle had apparently called them from the hospital emergency room, claiming I had kidnapped his wife and deliberately caused his serious traffic accident. But Emily stood tall and straight beside me for the first time in many years, no longer the cowering victim I'd watched suffer for months. She bravely showed the officers all her bruises, played them the recordings I'd made of Kyle's threats and violence, and told them the complete truth about years of systematic abuse and control. Officer Rodriguez listened very carefully, taking detailed notes as Emily courageously recounted years of violence and psychological manipulation. "Ma'am, you were absolutely right to leave that dangerous situation," he told her gently when she finished. Then he turned to me with a completely serious expression on his weathered face. "Mr. Walter, based on what we've heard and seen today, do you want to press formal assault charges against your son-in-law for pushing you into the snow and threatening your life?" I looked at Emily, who nodded encouragingly, and said firmly, "Yes, officer. I absolutely do." The courthouse was completely packed the day of Kyle's criminal hearing. He sat across the aisle wearing an expensive suit his high-priced lawyer had carefully selected, desperately trying to look respectable and wrongly accused of these charges. But the evidence against him was absolutely overwhelming and undeniable. My crystal-clear recordings played through the courtroom speakers, capturing his violent threats and drunken outbursts for everyone to hear. Emily's photographs of her bruises were formally entered as evidence, along with detailed written statements from neighbors who had witnessed his abusive behavior over many months. When Emily courageously took the witness stand, she spoke in a clear, strong voice about the years of systematic abuse she'd endured in silence. Kyle's face grew darker and more furious with each word she spoke, but he couldn't intimidate or silence her anymore. The truth was finally being told in a place where it truly mattered and had legal consequences. I watched proudly as my daughter reclaimed her voice and her power after years of forced silence. Guilty on all charges, the judge announced firmly, her authoritative voice echoing through the completely silent courtroom like thunder during a storm. Kyle's confident expression immediately crumpled as the harsh reality finally hit him. Emily squeezed my hand so tightly, I thought she might actually break my fingers. But her tears were tears of relief and freedom this time, not fear and pain. The wooden gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to break the invisible chains that had bound my daughter for so many terrible years. Kyle would serve 6 full months in county jail and be required to attend anger management classes twice weekly. Most importantly for our safety, Emily received a permanent restraining order that would legally keep him away from both of us for years. As we walked out of that courthouse together, I felt like we were finally walking into a completely new life. The nightmare was officially over, and we had survived it together as a family should. Emily moved back into my house temporarily while she figured out her next steps and began rebuilding her shattered life. Having her there made my old place feel truly alive again for the first time since her mother passed away from cancer. Her favorite coffee mug reappeared in the kitchen cabinet where it belonged. Her genuine laughter echoed through the hallways, and we talked late into many nights about everything we'd been through together. Some evenings she cried about all the precious years she'd lost to fear and abuse, but more often she smiled brightly about the hopeful future she was building for herself. We attended counseling sessions together twice a week, working hard to rebuild the trust and communication that Kyle had tried so desperately to destroy between us. Slowly but surely, both of us were healing from the deep trauma he'd inflicted on our family. Emily started talking about going back to school and maybe even dating again someday. The spark in her eyes was returning. One quiet evening as we sat comfortably by the fireplace, Emily asked me the question I'd been patiently waiting to hear. Dad, do you honestly forgive me for staying silent that terrible night when Kyle pushed you into the snow? I looked directly into her eyes, the same beautiful green eyes her mother had possessed, and told her the complete truth from my heart. Emily, I was never angry at you for 1 second. I was only angry at the fear Kyle used to control and silence you. She cried into my shoulder, finally releasing years of shame and guilt that she'd been carrying like heavy stones. I held her just like I had when she was little, rocking her gently as the snow fell peacefully outside our window. Before she went to bed that night, I handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter I'd written to Kyle in prison. It wasn't filled with rage or threats, but with a simple, powerful message. You will never break our family again. Love and truth always win in the end. Emily sealed it with a genuine smile, and we mailed it together the next morning. The snow that had once been the scene of my humiliation now looked pure and clean again, covering our world in hope and new beginnings.